Thank you. Mr. Young.
We've heard this sort of mischaracterization of the insulin provisions on the campaign trail. It's either because one of my opponents is misinformed, or it's because they are intentionally distorting Hoosiers. Either way, it doesn't seem to instill trust. With respect to insulin, Republicans voted on a package. I supported a package that would have ensured we brought the uninsured along. The Democrats couldn't go for it because it didn't allow for them to have a campaign issue. But instead, Republicans want to make sure that those who didn't have insurance at all could afford their insulin. In fact, we propose giving it to Hoosiers for free. But Chuck Schumer and other Democrats oppose that proposal. So there are a lot of things that we can do to bring down health care costs. Perhaps we'll have an opportunity to get into more broadly the issue in a bit.
Mr. McDermott, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
You know what else the Inflation Reduction Act had that Todd Young voted against, that Senator Todd Young voted against? Prescription drug price relief for our seniors. That's also included in that bill, which will allow Medicare recipients in the federal government to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies to help lower the price of pharmaceutical drugs, which would save seniors thousands of dollars a year. And our U.S. Senator, our senior senator, voted against it. Voted against seniors, voted against capping the price of drugs, voted against lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I think that that's abysmal.
Yes.
Mr. Young, you have 30 seconds.
The Inflation Reduction Act, so-called, doubled the size of the IRS. I don't know of many of my neighbors who say, gosh, inflation's really biting me. Biden's policies are crushing me. I want them to increase the number of auditors at the IRS. How about increase taxes? It does that too, including on those who make less than $10,000 a year. Once the proud party of the working class, the National Democratic Party, supports that as well. Billions for the Green New Deal initiatives, that as well. Does nothing for inflation whatsoever. I'm glad I opposed it.
Thank you. Our next question is: Americans pay the highest prescription drug prices in the world. If elected, what, if anything, would you do about this? Mr. McDermott, you get to go first.
I won't allow myself to be corrupted by special interests when I become Indiana's next U.S. Senator. I'm going to remember who is always my bosses. My bosses are the 6.6 million Hoosiers that live in this state, and our senior senator has forgotten who his bosses are. He thinks his bosses are the ones that funds his lavish campaign account and gives them hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. He pays more attention to them than he does to us average Hoosiers. I think the Inflation Reduction Act, lowering the price of prescription drugs, capping the cost of insulin, was a great move for our state, and I would have been proud to support that. But our senior senator doesn't agree because he's beholden to the pharmaceutical industry that gives him hundreds of thousands of dollars in his lavish campaign account, which paralyzes him. He can't do good things for Hoosiers and at the same time anger the people that are funding his campaign account, so he chooses to do nothing.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Listen, there are several things we need to do. We need to increase transparency into the system. We need more reporting about the middlemen in particular. After you research and develop a drug, you have middlemen who take a lot of money off the top. That increases the price of drugs for so many Hoosiers. We need increased competition. It's a role for the Department of Justice to make sure that we don't have pharmaceutical companies and others gaming the system once products come off of patent. And we need to move more towards result-based medicine, meaning if we have the opportunity to actually measure whether or not a particular compound works and works effectively, we ought to base compensation on that. I've put forward some proposals to do that very thing.
Thank you. Mr. Siniak.
Hoosiers are hurting, and medical costs are absolutely hurting them. And this is an issue, a real issue that we need to look at in Washington, D.C. But we need to look at it by opening up the market, by looking at the patent system, by making medicine more competitive. Like the American dream, competition breeds a healthy ground where we can bring down cost. When we have that competition, we will have that cost naturally decreased. There's ways to do that without government interference, and we need to make sure that we prioritize decreasing prices for Hoosiers and their families.
Mr. McDermott, you request a rebuttal. You have 30 seconds.
Senator Young talking about transparency. What a hoot. We're lucky we're here right now. I remember Senator Young speaking at a public event. He was being filmed by one of his constituents, and he had one of his people go out there and tell him to put the camera down. Senator Young is not transparent, and we're lucky we're even here for one debate. When I challenged him for 9 debates across the state of Indiana, I think that's a reasonable expectation. We're running for the highest federal office in the state of Indiana, and we got 1 hour with Senator Young, and here we are right now, and we're lucky we got that. Transparency, give me a break.
Thank you. The U.S. has committed over $50 billion in aid to Ukraine. Should Hoosiers care about the war in Ukraine? And if so, why? And what, if anything, should the U.S. do to shape the outcome of the war? Mr. Young?
This is an essential geopolitical and national security issue, not just for the Ukrainian people, but for the entire world, especially Americans. We need to stand up for the basic principles of self-government and sovereignty. If we don't in Ukraine, then Xi Jinping, the leader of China, and the mullahs in Iran will infer weakness from our failure to assist the Ukrainians. So I stand arm in arm with the Biden administration in their effort to resource our brave Ukrainian fighters. Now, I also stand arm in arm as we press the Europeans to step up, to carry more of the load themselves so that the United States can focus our energy and our resources elsewhere post haste. But this is indeed a national security issue that could determine the future of the world. If we don't arrest them there, then you're going to see Xi Jinping move on Taiwan and perhaps some other areas that will impact our lines of trade and
Thank
other issues of consequence.
Mr.
Thank you.
Siniak.
Ukraine and what's happening internationally is a concern to Hoosiers. It's also a concern what we do with war and what nations we look at. We have to come to the table and look at solutions with our neighbors, our community neighbors around the world to find ways to find peace in this issue. Ukraine is a tricky issue, but I've been at war. America's been at war most of my life, and I look at the soldiers and the issues that they come home with, the PTSD, the lack of true medical care. I look at the fact that they have high homeless rates and high suicide rates. The cost of war is absolutely something that Hoosiers know when they see their families come with these devastations. The incumbent encouraged through his Twitter immediate action, immediate boots on the ground. I want to look at diplomatic solutions. I want to come to our neighbors and look for diplomacy.
Thank you, Mr. Siniak. Mr. McDermott.
Nobody has to tell Mayor McDermott that Russia is our mortal enemy, because I served 6 years in the United States Navy underwater off the coast of Russia, and Russian submarines are currently off the coast of America right now, and that's the way it's been since the 1960s. Russia wants to destroy America militarily. I know Senator Young likes to focus on China, and I think China is a threat, but it's more of a financial threat. Russia is pointing nuclear weapons at us. Russia is pointing nuclear weapons at Ukraine, and they're threatening to use those nuclear weapons. So we need to do everything we can as Americans to supply arms to Ukraine, to let them to continue the fight and regain the territory that they're gaining back, to supply NATO and to increase our alliance with NATO. I'm super happy that Sweden and Finland joined our alliance, and I'm looking forward to the day when Ukraine settles this dispute and enjoys the NATO alliance as well.
Thank you. Mr. Young, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, there seems to be pretty broad agreement among the candidates here that some measure of involvement by the United States is needed. I, of course, agree with that. What is not needed is this continued stubborn clinging to a Green New Deal, this anti-U.S. fossil fuel policy that the Biden administration has put in place. It's time to bring more oil and gas online. That will allow us to send more of it to the Europeans who are dependent on the Russians right now, and to ourselves so that inflation won't be jacked up.
Thank you. Political candidates. Oh, Mr. McDermott, would you like 30 seconds?
Just a quick rebuttal. You know, I appreciate what Senator Young just said, but we also need to realize that climate change is happening. Our environment is currently being damaged, and we have to get on this worldwide problem immediately before it's irreparably harmed. The earth is irreparably harmed. I go back to places I grew up, and I see rivers that are dried up and lakes that are dried up, fires that happen every season, and we need to do something about it instead of sticking our head in the sand, Senator.
I'd like to remind our candidates that while we have the opportunity for rebuttal, I have many wonderful questions that Hoosiers submitted. I know they're waiting to hear them asked and answered.
I just think it's real important on this one.
I will be asking another question on the environment very shortly, so I appreciate your patience.
Thanks so much.
The next question I have involves the 2020 election. Political candidates nationwide continue to argue that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. Who do you think won the 2020 presidential election, and why do you think that? Mr. Siniak, we'll begin with you.
Hoosiers are frustrated with the voting process because there was a concern that their voice wasn't heard. Biden won the presidency, he is our president, but the concern is still there. Why do Hoosiers feel that their voice was not heard through the election process? We have to look at these concerns, these very real concerns, because your vote does matter. Your vote is important and it's essential to democracy. So yes, Biden is our president, but why do we feel that our votes are not being counted correctly? We have to look at this from a federal issue standpoint, and I want to make sure that we have equality within our election system.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott?
The thing that's real frustrating about our senior senator is the two faces that we see of Todd Young. Todd Young comes in here and he's going to tell you that Joe Biden won the election, I imagine. But on January 6th, Todd Young stood on the steps of the U.S. Senate in his camouflage jacket, which is not normal attire for a U.S. senator to wear, especially on January 6th. And he told a group of protesters that he agreed with them, that Donald Trump won the election, but he took an oath under God, and then he walked into the U.S. Senate and voted for Joe Biden. On the steps of the Capitol, he says, I agree that President Trump won the election. It's on tape. You could look at it. Then he walks into the U.S. Capitol and displays his second face where he votes Joe Biden as the president of the United States. The fact is this, Joe Biden did win the presidency. We need to continue the democratic experiment by acknowledging when you lost. And I've lost before. And I called up the person that beat me on that night. And it was the hardest phone call I made in my life. And I said, congratulations, Congressman, you won. I'm going to do anything I can help you to succeed. And I meant it. And that's what you're supposed to do when you lost. And the president of the United States didn't even have the same courage to do that. And a mayor of the city of Hammond did.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
What an unfortunate presentation that just was. I'm reminded of Abraham Lincoln's response to Stephen Douglas. Abraham Lincoln said, if I had two faces, you think I'd be wearing this one. Listen, I acknowledge the day that the election became official, that Joe Biden was president of the United States. I did indeed support someone else. So did a majority of Hoosiers on the election night. But the moment that those electoral ballots were submitted through the Electoral College as mandated, just weeks after the election, I acknowledged it. So I think the record is pretty clear on that one.
Thank you. Under what circumstance, if any, should abortion be legally allowed, and should the legality of abortion be decided at the federal or the state level? Mr. McDermott, you go first.
I support Roe versus Wade. And there were limitations in Roe versus Wade. And Roe versus Wade worked for my entire life, for 5 decades. It was the precedent established by the U.S. Supreme Court that women had the right to privacy, including the right to have an abortion. And Todd Young and his radical GOP agenda voted to confirm 3 of the justices to the U.S. Supreme Court that didn't respect 50 years of precedent, and they threw America into turmoil. Right now, women in Indiana don't even know what the current status of the abortion law in our state is. It's because it's confusing. There are rights that should be set by the U.S. Supreme Court, and when they are set by the U.S. Supreme Court, they shouldn't be removed, especially after 5 decades of precedent. So I believe that rights that are granted by the U.S. Supreme Court should stay with the American people. And quite frankly, I'm ashamed that Senator Young, who is anti-abortion in all cases, including in rape, incest, and life of the mother, did exactly what he told, and he gerrymandered the Supreme Court so that Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Thanks so much. I agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yes, that's right. The liberal exponent of abortion rights as a matter of policy. But as a matter of law, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that Roe versus Wade was weak law. It did not invite a conversation with the legislature. What she meant is that we have a democratic process in this country. We have a tradition, and it's part of our fundamental law, that it is the people that weighs in on various decisions of consequence. What Roe decided was, or what the Dodd decision decided was that Roe was no longer law because it didn't invite that conversation. The people of Indiana and 49 other states are in the process, consistent with our values and ideas of trying to get this right. I don't think anyone pretends that we've gotten it right. I do accept exceptions, and I'll accept whatever the people of Indiana decide.
Thank you. Mr. Siniak.
Abortion is an issue that has divided our nation. I maintain that politicians should not act as physicians. And there's many times, especially with women, that I am not going to pretend to understand those decisions that need to be made, especially when it comes to end-of-life decisions. I believe that despite whatever law is created, either pro-life or to codify it, that we can still reduce abortions throughout America. And it's through a plan that looks through not banning abortion, but through the heart and the concerns that women have when they're making these decisions. It's looking at economic reasons and helping them thrive economically. It's making contraceptive options available over the counter. It's making sure that young men and women understand what safe sex practices are. So politicians shouldn't act as physicians. There's many medical needs that we absolutely have to protect. But at the same time, we can still have solutions that reduce abortion across America, no matter what each state decides.
Mr. McDermott, you may have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Senator Young made the argument that he thinks Indiana should be the one that gets to make the decision on whether or not women have the right to privacy to have this procedure done. But we didn't give that right once it was granted to the southern states after the Civil War, when we passed the Civil War amendments. If we gave states the right to whether or not to enforce the Civil War amendments, there are some states that would have chosen to discriminate against African Americans. So there's some rights that have to be established by the Supreme Court and cannot be taken away, and that includes the right to an abortion. And I'm 100% pro-choice, and I'm going to fight to codify Roe versus Wade when I become your senator.
Thank you. With the overturning of Roe versus Wade, some believe other constitutionally protected rights, such as contraception, same-sex marriage, could also be overturned. Do you support federal protections for such rights, or should these decisions be left to the states? Mr. Young, you will go first.
Thank you. This is an issue of settled law. The Obergefell decision came down several years ago, and 8 of 9 Supreme Court justices are on record indicating that this is settled law, that it is not being called into question. There are no actions at the local or state level to challenge the Obergefell decision. So what changed? Well, I'll tell you what changed. Chuck Schumer is looking for an election year issue to distract voters' attentions away from the things that are most on their mind, like inflation, like the open borders that have led to opioids coming into our neighborhoods and cause crime to increase in our cities, like the challenges overseas, including the botched exit from Afghanistan. So it has, to some measure, I have to say, distracted people. But if presented with this issue, my first thought is, why does big government regulate marriage altogether? They certainly don't regulate baptisms and other religious sacraments. But my second is, I'll listen to Hoosiers and allow them to weigh in.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Siniak.
Look, to say that this issue is a distraction is a gross misunderstanding for Hoosier families. It's out of touch with what Hoosiers are going through. I've had many people reach out to me saying, what next? Interracial marriage, homosexual marriage, non-traditional marriage. What is next with the Supreme Court? And these are very real issues that are touching Hoosier families and American families. And we have to stand with civil liberties. Ideally, the federal government would never regulate or license marriage. But we're at a place in our society where we do. And when we do that, we have to look at it with equality. And that's equality for all families in America and all Hoosier families, no matter what that looks like.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott.
I support same-sex marriage. It's a right that was granted by the United States Supreme Court, and it should be never trampled on like Roe versus Wade was trampled on. Senator Young was asked this very question about a month ago on TV, and he answered basically the same way, saying it should be Indiana that decides whether or not same-sex marriage is allowed in its state. And I tell you what, we already know how Indiana feels on this issue, because for a number of years, Indiana outlawed same-sex marriage in our state. Only until Obergefell was passed by the United States Supreme Court were same-sex couples allowed to marry. I think it's abysmal that you have a U.S. senator that can't say yes or no whether or not he supports same-sex marriages. They're incredible couples. I have a number of friends involved in same-sex marriages, and they're happy families, healthy families. Welcome to the party. I tell you what, I think it's a disgrace that we're talking about this issue. I think it's a disgrace that we're even fearing that the U.S. Supreme Court could take away another right, and I will fight to codify Obergefell while I'm fighting to codify Roe versus Wade in the U.S. Senate.
Thank you. We've received a number of questions from Hoosiers regarding immigration. Are you concerned about the number of immigrants crossing the southern border? And if so, what is your proposed solution? Mr. Siniak, we'll begin with you.
This is a very personal issue to me. I have two siblings that are immigrants. While I understand that we need to secure the borders, like a castle, we need to have a moat. We also need to have a drawbridge that's wide and welcoming for those who want to pursue the American dream, who want to work here and want to flourish in America. Immigration is something that both Republicans and Democrats have failed on. Their policies continue to fail those who want to pursue an American dream. We have to look at a process that still vets them so that we are secure, but allows for more fluid immigrants to be able to come to America. We need workers in America. We are the melting pot. And this is something that we are founded on. Many different groups come together and live the American dream. Let's continue that and allow immigration and make sure that there is a way into America.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott?
This is also an important issue to me. I'm married to an immigrant. My wife, Marissa, is 100% Polish, immigrated to America, naturalized American citizen. I'm very proud of her. I support immigration. I support immigrants, and our immigration system is broken. And we gave Senator Young 12 years to fix this problem. And in 12 years, he's had two opportunities, clean opportunities where he could have made a difference and voted to fix our broken immigration system, and he chose to go with tax cuts instead. I tell you what, our immigration system is broken. I do support our Border Patrol agents. I do support enforcing our immigration laws. I do not support illegal immigration. However, I do also support DACA recipients who are in our country through no fault of their own for decades in some cases. And the former president threatened to send dreamers back to the country they came from. A lot of those dreamers live in the city of Hammond, and they've never even been in that country they quote unquote came from. I support dreamers. I support immigration. I do not support illegal immigration. And Todd Young's had plenty of chances to fix this, and he's failed us.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
That's just wrong. The talking points are wrong. Let me say this. I spent time on the southern border. I operated within a Marine Corps unit that flew around drones, working with the Drug Enforcement Agency, Customs and Border Patrol, and others. And my job back in the 1990s was to try and do our part to deal with the drugs and the human trafficking that we found in the Yuma sector of Arizona. That was nothing compared to the millions and millions who have crossed the southern border since President Biden came into office. He eliminated Title 42, the public health protections. He stopped funding a border wall. Yes, we do indeed need some actual fencing to help secure the border. He has not made resourcing the Customs and Border Patrol a priority. What's happened? Lots more drugs. In fact, the leading killer of 18 to 45-year-olds right now is fentanyl, most of it coming across the border, and that has fueled crime, all these drugs coming across the border. Indianapolis is now the most dangerous city behind San Francisco, Chicago, New York. More dangerous than those cities.
Mr. Siniak, would you like a rebuttal?
I would. He said our talking
30 seconds.
points are wrong. And I agree, we do need secure borders. However, the best way to secure borders is allow for immigrations and those who do want to pursue the American dream to actually have a process in so that they don't have to cross illegally. When we have that process available, we can then make it much more easier to secure the border to those who do want to do harm, such as fentanyl and bringing that in our country. But we have to have that process first for those coming in.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott, you may also have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Senator Young points out all the problems we have at our border, and what he doesn't point out is that he's had 12 years in Washington, D.C. to fix these problems and has been unsuccessful. You don't find me complaining too often about the city of Hammond, because I did. It's my responsibility to fix those problems that we have. Senator Young has been in Washington, D.C. for 12 years. He complains about the broken immigration system, a system he's done nothing to fix since he's been our U.S. Senator. We've given him 12 years to fix it. He's done nothing so far, so why don't we give somebody else a try?
Mr. Young.
Just a point of clarification out of respect for one of my debaters. I do agree, just for clarification, that legal immigration reform is needed. I have supported it. An important and meritorious proposal came to the floor during the Trump administration, which would have given a path to legal status for DACA recipients. The Democrats opposed that because they wanted another election year issue. I guess they think this is going to distract Hoosiers from the inflation challenges they're facing.
Thank you. Do you support the decriminalizing or legalizing of marijuana at the federal level for medicinal and or recreational use? Mr. McDermott, we'll start with you.
It's funny how I got that question. Yes, I do. I support the recreational and medicinal use of marijuana. You go to any cannabis store in any of the surrounding states, 33 states have legalized it. If you go to Illinois or Michigan right now and you go into the parking lot of a dispensary, you're gonna see 75% of the plates in the parking lot are Hoosier license plates. People going to buy gummy bears so they can sleep better at night. And when they buy those gummy bears and they put them in their car and they drive back to Indiana, they become criminals under our Indiana code. They could be arrested and thrown in jail, which costs more money, which gives them a criminal record, and which is just backwards, in my opinion. This is an ancient policy that we still enforce in Indiana. It's dollars and cents. You know the state of Illinois made more money off of cannabis last year than they made off of taxing alcohol? And we don't want any of that in Indiana. We don't want the millions in jobs. We don't want the millions in investment. We don't want the new economic development. We just want to keep arresting people. Yeah, I support legalization and decriminalization of cannabis.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
To put it charitably, this would not be my top priority right now, running for public office, because Hoosiers don't want this to be my top priority. This would probably be a third-tier priority. A first-tier priority would be inflation, the worst inflation in 40 years. Gasoline over $4 a gallon. It was roughly $2 a gallon when the Biden-Harris administration took office. We have national security issues. We have an open border. We have crime in our cities. So, listen, I will work with state governments as they come up with their own laws. If there are federal barriers to them enacting good laws, then I certainly will consider that. One example would be safe banking legislation that would allow those states which have legalized marijuana for, say, medicinal purposes the monies earned through those businesses could put their marijuana-earned monies into local banks. We should empower that through our federally protected financial institutions. That's an example of where the federal government could get involved.
Thank you. Mr. Siniak.
It's interesting that he says a top-tier priority is inflation, and yet he spends more than Bernie Sanders and contributes to the debt, which increases the spending, which increases the printing of the Federal Reserve. We could do better with inflation. But on cannabis, I do support cannabis reform. The MORE Act was something that Congress passed, and yet the Senate failed to look at it. More Americans right now in the United States can get cannabis legally than illegally. It is something we need to reform, and it's like prohibition. Similar to alcohol, prohibition never worked. Cannabis is the same thing. We do need reform. There's two ways to do it. We could pass the MORE Act, or we could just take it off the schedule. Both of those are solutions for Hoosiers so that we can actually increase our economy within that issue, like similar neighboring states such as Michigan and Illinois.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Supporters of cannabis in Indiana have been getting what I call the Hoosier two-step. They have Governor Holcomb that says, we can't do anything in Indiana till the federal government takes it off the Schedule I list of drugs. And then you talk to Senator Young and he says, I believe in states' rights. It's up to Governor Holcomb on whether or not cannabis is going to be legalized in Indiana. That's two faces. That's the Hoosier two-step. And I tell you what, I think our U.S. senators should take the lead on this issue so that we can stop arresting Hoosiers, putting them in jail for having a plant in their pocket.
Yes, Mr. Young, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. The issue of spending was brought up, and in the event it doesn't come up again, discretionary spending has consistently gone down. That's annual spending that Congress appropriates, gone down since I first came into public office. I'd also note that the uptick in spending that's been referred to multiple times now was a result of a global pandemic. It's the job of government to help people out during a global pandemic. What would have they cut? Household payments, Paycheck Protection Program to ensure employers remain whole and will be there on the back end of the pandemic. Operation Warp Speed.
Thank you. Mr. Siniak, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
He claims that the spending is just with the pandemic. and he's right, there was some spending with the pandemic, yet it continues through things like the PACT Act. Absolutely ridiculous spending that he has shown bipartisanship with the Democrats to continue spending in Washington, D.C. So yes, the pandemic was part of it, but he doesn't acknowledge what he continues to do and put forth.
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to say I will defend my support of the PACT Act. It's really important that we stand up for our veterans. They earn these benefits, and I'm proud to have supported it.
And I'd like to remind all of our candidates that we have so many questions, so I'd like us to restrain our use of rebuttals for the times most necessary. But to revisit a topic that came up organically earlier, I want to ask first Mr. Young, what is your perspective on climate change, and what would you do as a senator and have done as a senator to address this issue?
My perspective is that the climate is indeed warming based on reading a lot, visiting with a lot of people, and trying to apply logic to the world around me. It's also that humans are contributing to that, though I think sometimes the level of precision makes me skeptical. With that said, taxing our way out of this isn't going to be the best way to do it. I do think some targeted spending at the federal level for research makes a lot of sense. I've consistently supported that. And then the private sector will come in and provide the bulk of capital. This is how we can innovate our way out of a climate crisis. The likes of Bill Gates and a host of other luminaries in this field agree that this is the most realistic way to do it. The way not to do this is applying just incredible strictures on our oil and gas and transitioning in the very short term from a fossil fuel-based economy into the green economy that increases the price of gas.
Thank you. Mr. Siniak?
We absolutely have to take care of our environment, but with crisis comes opportunity and opportunity for innovation. Things like what Holland did, where we can look at receding coastlines and have real solutions for these issues. But we have to protect our environment with good policy so that our future generations have an environment to be free in, to live and thrive in. If we don't have policies that protect our environment, then we are failing the next generations. So yes, we need to make sure that global warming, we have policies, but we also need to encourage innovation. And with opportunity, we as Americans will thrive through this challenge.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott?
I believe in experts. Like when, I believe in teachers, and I leave them alone when it comes to teaching. I believe in doctors when they tell us how to deal with pandemics. And I believe scientists when they tell us that the earth is warming. And I see it anecdotally with my own eyes. I see rivers and streams that I used to go to when I was a little kid that are completely dried up. I see areas where I grew up that have constant fire season every summer when we used to never have fires. You know, climate change is a controversial issue in America and in the world, and it's hard to battle it across the world, but we can't even get on the same page in America. 50% of our population believes climate change is happening, the other 50% doesn't, and what we need our elected leaders to do is lead on this issue. Senator Young, lead and tell the people why we need to make these investments in clean energy. That's why I supported the Inflation Reduction Act, and I was so happy to see it made the biggest investment in green energy in American history. And I think that's leading, and we need to explain to the American people why we're doing what we're doing, and then we need to convince China, India, and the rest of the world to follow our example in America.
Mr. Young, you have 30 seconds.
It's hard to see how the Inflation Protection Act would make a meaningful difference. It would double the number of auditors at the IRS. It would increase taxes on people who make less than $10,000 a year. That doesn't do much to help global warming. I've supported targeted investments in green energy technologies. In fact, they're included in my CHIPS and Science Act. I would say with respect to experts, I'll trust experts, but you have to trust but verify. Fauci said, don't wear a mask. Whatever you do, don't wear a mask. A few weeks later, he says, wear masks. Jake Sullivan said, we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan
Senator.
in short order. No problem.
Would you support the elimination or sunsetting of Social Security and Medicare? If not, how do you propose to pay for these programs in the future, given the fact they are scheduled to run out of money very soon? Mr. Siniak, you have the first response.
Social Security is a concern, and I hear it from Hoosiers everywhere. I have many come to me and say, I need Social Security, and others that come to me and say, we have to do better so that I can actually receive something. There is a plan out there. It's the Cato 6.2% plan, and this will make it solvable. We can do better with Social Security. The 6.2% plan is exactly that. What it does is it allows for individuals like myself to be able to opt out while my employer still pays half of it, so that those who need Social Security can still have that security. However, it allows for more opportunity for those in my generation to flourish with our retirement funding. So the 6.2% plan will make it solvable, and I believe that this is what America needs.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott?
I plan to protect Social Security because it's a promise we made to the American people. I paid my first Social Security payment at the age of 16 when I worked at McDonald's, and I discovered over the course of my career that all this money I'm paying is eventually going to come back to me when I'm older and I need that money. It's a promise we make to the American people, and it's a promise that I intend to keep as your next U.S. Senator. You know, Senator Young, when he was running for Congress in 2010, described the Social Security system as a Ponzi scheme. Well, I don't think it's a Ponzi scheme, but I do think we need to keep our hands off of it in Washington, D.C., and we do need to do things to shore up that system. You know, and I'm super happy that a cost of living adjustment is going into effect this year to offset the high rate of inflation. I think it's totally appropriate to give our seniors and the people that depend on Social Security, the disabled, and our elderly, to make sure that they get an 8% adjustment to match the inflation rate. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Listen, my mom's on Social Security. I represent countless Hoosier seniors who are on Social Security. This program is essential. We dishonor those seniors if we don't keep our promises to them about the number of benefits that they've been promised over the years. But this program must be saved. Right now, it is insolvent. Any auditor will tell you. And we need to come together in a bipartisan way. Stop the demagoguing. Stop the demagoguing. Come together and fix this. Save Social Security. What I'm hearing mostly from seniors right now, though, is not about Social Security. They still have a few years before they're hearing that program won't have enough money coming in to pay out all the promised benefits. I'm hearing about inflation. It's the cruelest form of tax. It disproportionately hurts people of modest means and those on fixed incomes. It disproportionately hurts our senior citizens. Stop the inflation. This COLA adjustment is piddly compared to the consumption needs of Hoosier seniors.
Thank you. And at this point, I'll tell our candidates that we'll refrain from rebutting in order to get through questions for the next few minutes. Mr. McDermott, do you believe there's a growing white supremacist movement in this country? And if so, what can public officials do to address this?
I believe America has race problems and white supremacy issues, absolutely. I'm not sure if it's growing or not because I'm so far removed from any of that ideological thought. It's hard for me to even comprehend it. But I think it's dangerous when I see our elected officials hanging out with insurrectionists like Oath Keepers and posing with Oath Keepers and posing with military-style assault weapons with Oath Keepers. I think that's dangerous to our government. I think that's dangerous to our republic, and it's something I would never do. White supremacy is a problem. Racial issues in America are definitely a problem. I'm not sure if it's growing or not, but it's definitely a problem. And, you know, when President Obama was elected president of the United States in 2008, I was so hopeful that America was turning the corner on our ugly past with racial politics, and unfortunately, we've all discovered that it's only gotten worse since 2008. It's something that we're going to have to keep working on. So anyway, thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
I think the DOJ has some compelling reports on this, and I agree with Mr. McDermott. I'm concerned about this as well. In the end, I believe we all need to engage in individual responsibility, and those who don't, those who are violent, those who engage in race-based violence in particular, need to be held to account by our local prosecutors and entire criminal justice system. BLM and Antifa also deserve mention as some radical hate groups who have been involved in violence here in this city of Indianapolis in recent years. So it needs to stop coming from all corners.
Thank you. Mr. Siniak.
For far too long, we've allowed petty differences from allowing us to see our neighbors. And any concern of growing hate is a concern. I come from a very diverse family. I have black siblings. I have Hispanic nephews that I helped raise. And we absolutely have to look at taking care of everybody. The concern of hate groups, we have to have good policy that creates a system where we have a balance and checks and balances of fairness so that those who are minority communities can feel the freedoms from the oppression. If our neighbors are feeling this concern, we have to take a real look at it, because I'm not one that can make that claim, but they are. So if they feel that concern, let's investigate it.
Thank you. Now, I do want to offer one rebuttal to this question given the time that we have, and I appreciate the candidate's collegiality in allowing me to temporarily restrain our rebuttal. I offer 30 seconds to any candidate who would like to take it, and you don't have to take it.
Is that a rebuttal
To any
pertaining
of these,
to the last
yes.
question?
Yes. Would you like that, Senator Young?
No, thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
I understand. Anyone else? Okay. So at this point, we are coming close to our end of our debate, and I would like to address our final question. So now it is time for the final question this evening. For this question, each candidate has 1 minute to respond. And the question is this: what specific accomplishments can we expect from you in the next 6 years if you are elected? Mr. Seniak, you get to go first.
I believe in bringing back public service to Washington, D.C. I believe that as a senator, it's not what I am going to get out of being a senator, but what I can do for you. I want to take care of our veterans through my vet care policies. I want to take care of Hoosiers and their wallets through good economic policy. And I want to ensure civil liberties are in place so that we can pass those freedoms on to the next generation. As a senator, these are my top 3 priorities that I will fight for in Washington, D.C. I want Hoosiers to live the best lives now, but also with sound policy that will ensure that same civil liberties and freedoms for the next generation and the generation after that. We have to be not so narrow-minded with our spending, but we have to look for economic stability, and I appreciate tonight's civil discussions.
Thank you. To remind the candidates of the question, Mr. McDermott, what specific accomplishments can we expect from you in the next 6 years if elected?
And this is the last question, right?
It is. That is.
Hoosier women trust me. I'm on an all-woman ticket right now, and November 8th, 2022 is about Hoosier women who've lost their reproductive rights. And even though I'm a man, Hoosier women trust me to do the right thing when I win on November 8th. And I know why I'm going to win on November 8th is because Hoosier women voted in record numbers to elect me as their next U.S. Senator. And I promise Hoosier women, when I go to Washington, D.C., I'm going to know why I got there. I got there because you voted for me, you trusted me, and when I go to Washington, D.C., I will not rest until Roe versus Wade is codified and Hoosier women have the protections that they had a couple months ago. And Senator Young doesn't deserve another 6 years in Washington, D.C., because he turned his back on women when he appointed 3 people to the U.S. Supreme Court. He turned his back on veterans when he voted 2 times against the PACT Act, and he voted against seniors when he voted against lowering prescription drug costs. We can't afford another 6 years of Todd Young in the United States Senate. Vote for Tom McDermott, gomcdermott.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. And Mr. Young, I'll remind you, the final question this evening is what specific accomplishments can we expect from you in the next 6 years if you are reelected?
Well, thank you. I again want to thank my fellow debaters this evening for this opportunity. Hoosiers want a fighter during this time. Hoosiers are hurting because of the out-of-control spending from the Biden-Harris administration, which has catalyzed inflation. They want a fighter who has the courage to stand up against these profligate spending patterns. I will do that in the future if Hoosiers give me their trust and support the next 6 years. But I won't miss an opportunity to partner with folks on the other side of the aisle when they have good ideas in the best interest of Hoosiers. I'll do that with respect to national security issues. I'll do that with respect to innovation issues. I'll do that with respect to bringing high-tech jobs here in Indiana. In fact, I did all of those things when I worked together with some prominent Democrats to pass the CHIPS and Science Act. They can expect more of that good government, which is infused with a whole lot of loyal opposition when necessary. If they give me another 6 years, I hope to earn their trust and support. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to thank each of our candidates here today, this evening. The first candidate, incumbent Republican Senator Todd Young, our second, Libertarian James Seniak, and our third candidate, Democrat Tom McDermott. Thank you for participating in this evening's debate.
Thank you.
Candidates, On behalf of the Indiana Debate Commission, thank you again for participating this evening. The Commission is a nonprofit organization that depends on many affiliates to make events like these possible. We want to thank all of them for their participation. Finally, thank you to all of you in our audience of voters. Thank you for submitting questions. Thank you for watching or listening. Now it is your turn to make your voice heard and cast your vote in the voting booth. For the Indiana Debate Commission, I'm Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson. Thank you again for tuning in, and good night.